Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry, as I stutter. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss geospatial advances to close the digital divide. I'd like to let everyone know that we are recording this session. All attendees have been muted for quality assurance purposes. We encourage questions through the use of the chat or the Q&A section of this platform. We'll be happy to answer your questions throughout the webinar. My name is Sandy Dyer. I'm a client success manager with Datamark. Datamark is a public safety team of Michael Baker International. My background comes from a long career in local and state government focused on public safety and more specifically 911 and next generation 911. I'd like you to meet my co-presenter for today's discussion. Jeremy, would you like to share a little bit about yourself today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy. As Sandy said, my name is Jeremy Jorick. I've been with Michael Baker International for 15 years. I'm located out of the Pittsburgh headquarters operation here in Pennsylvania. So good afternoon to everyone on this side of the coast and good morning to everyone on the West Coast. My background with Baker, I lead the Geospatial program out of Pittsburgh, and that includes application design and broadband planning. So looking forward to walking through this with you today. And as Sandy said, don't hesitate to ask any questions. So feedback is much appreciated. Thank you.
And then folks, please accept my apology. I'm going to turn off my video for today's presentation. I've been experiencing some bandwidth concerns and I want to make sure the session itself gets through to you clearly. So take a moment to stop my video. Okay, so just to give you a little background on how Jeremy and I became co-presenters on this topic. So Michael Baker International has 17 teams and practices, including Datamark. I'm with Datamark, the public safety team of Michael Baker, and then Jeremy is with the Geographic Information Technology team. So these are two of the 17 teams within Michael Baker, and we're partnering on this on the broadband initiative. Because we see value not only to the stakeholders from a broadband perspective, but also in broadband efforts to support next generation 911 efforts. Michael Baker also, does everything from bridges to highways, rail and transit, intelligent transportation, aviation, all those other services you'd expect from a consulting company. And even in 2020, last year, we celebrated our 80th anniversary. Now, Jeremy specifically has a wealth of knowledge regarding many industries to include broadband, as he's participated in several projects, and he's going to share with us a specific case study on closing the broadband digital divide and provide information on what broadband planning for your community may look like at the latter part of this presentation. Okay, so let's go ahead and review today's agenda. So the first thing we'd like to discuss is some movement towards broadband improvement. There's been some significant efforts in improving broadband location information, and we're going to go ahead and cover that. And then some state and local efforts for better broadband. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy, and he's going to review his case study for Beaver County, Pennsylvania, the Office of Planning and Redevelopment project. And then after that, he's going to go over with us a broadband project planning and implementation plan, which I really think you're going to find valuable. So let's get started by looking at the movement towards improving broadband. Access to broadband is a necessity for today's modern society. Recent efforts identified a large gap in our ability to function, exposing what was once thought of as a luxury and elevating it to a need. The disparity of access to resources and information was prevalent, whether due to socioeconomic limitations or deficiencies in infrastructure, whether that infrastructure was physical, meaning actual lines in the ground, or data-driven. The recent events established the perfect environment to challenge the classic speed test of broadband accessibility. And although we suspected there was disparity, we lacked the empirical evidence we gained for the past roughly year and a half. To correct the disparity, actions have been taken to address the gap that played out in front of us. Through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the Broadband Data Act, the rules and funding have been established to improve broadband access. There is hope that the roughly $1 trillion act will be passed, providing necessary funds for improvement over the 8 years of the grant program. The infrastructure bill defines a broadband appropriation of $42,450 million, with a minimum initial allocation of $100 million for each state, with additional allocation of the remaining amounts on or after, on or after the date on which the broadband data maps are made public, which I believe was on May 15, 2021, but don't quote me on that, please. An important aspect of the infrastructure bill is the focus on underserved, unserved, and anchor community institutions, which includes public safety entities, among many other government and community support organizations. Within the infrastructure bill, under section 60102, titled Grants for Broadband Deployment, it indicates that the eligible entity is the state. It does include information on subgrantees, and includes provisions for political subdivisions and consortia to apply for grant funds should an eligible entity be unsuccessful. It also provides information on what is considered a covered application, which would include a letter of intent, initial proposal, or final proposal, although I would look for a future process to better define the parameters of a grant program. The American Society of Civil Engineers 2021 report card for America's infrastructure found a need to focus on unserved and underserved communities when they identified 65% of counties were not meeting the FCC's definition of broadband, and that 1 in 5 school-aged children lacked high-speed internet connection. The ASCE report card also indicated that the committee determined there was insufficient information on broadband infrastructure to justify a category grade, but found it prudent to make recommendation on how to improve broadband infrastructure. The recommendations from the ASCE infrastructure report card included, among other recommendations, ensuring the updated maps required by the Broadband Data Act are developed in close coordination with state, local, and private stakeholders, that states and municipalities close the gap in digital for all through a coordinated approach to ensure broadband is built out to underserved populations, and the prudence of co-location of broadband, a dig once philosophy, much like our GIS philosophy of build once, use many. The disparity in broadband accessibility has called for improved definition of the needs around it, and not just as they pertain to the minimum connection speeds. It's been recognized that the high level of data collection in previous efforts, such as census block assessment, may not have been the best way to define the level of accessibility when it comes to location. New efforts to include house by house, location by location information to determine where broadband access service is available, and to standardize location data through the use of a broadband serviceable location fabric. While the FCC second order and third further notice noted that the Broadband Data Act authorized the creation and maintenance of the fabric, funding hadn't been appropriated to implement. Congress recently authorized funding of the Digital Opportunity Data Collection and the fabric, enabling the Commission to move forward. As part of the restructuring of the broadband mapping, the FCC third report and order identified a process for collecting verified data from state, local, tribal, and federal agencies as a necessary component to implementing a broadband locations fabric database. It also allowed the Commission to adopt a fundamental definition of location for the purposes of the fabric. Now, any government agency with the intent to improve will have the ability to challenge the data contained in the fabric database, as well as data submitted by internet service providers. As geospatial and public safety professionals, location has a very distinct meaning to us. Therefore, it's important to understand how broadband location is defined down to each type of location so that there isn't any confusion. Location is defined as a business or residential location in the United States at which fixed broadband internet access service is or can be installed, and each location as a single point defined by a set of geographic coordinates that fall within the footprint of the building. In addition, further definition has been applied for each location type. Now let's take a look at that. Okay, so I don't normally like to read from screens, but since this information is direct quotes, I'm going to go ahead and stick with that information. So in defining a residential location, it's all residential structures, including all structures that are or contain housing units or group quarters based on the U.S. Census Bureau definition of these terms. A business location is all non-residential structures that are on a property without residential locations and that would be expected to demand broadband internet access service. And then the multi-tenant environment as a single record in the fabric and to the extent feasible to associate the number of units within. Although honestly, I didn't really find any definition of how to associate the number of units within. And while many of you will say, we already have a single point address data set, and I understand that, I would ask you to see the possibilities rather than limitations to this definition, as few of us have a complete master address database with verified geodetic coordinates for each single location, since this level of quality can be cost prohibitive due to the limited funding, resources, and staff to perform on-the-ground efforts. In addition to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, on August 24th, the House Energy and Commerce Committee released its portion of the Budget Reconciliation Act, which appropriates $10 billion for Next Generation 911. The funds, which can be used for training, equipment, and services to implement, operate, and maintain NG 911, are to remain available until September 30th, 2026. Through these dollars, the Broadband Initiative, and perhaps even portions of the Transportation Infrastructure Bill, government has the opportunity to collaborate to support a key need of Next Generation 911, and that is highly accurate, authoritative GIS data. Couple that with an opportunity to enhance multiple public needs at every level of government, whether they are broadband, transportation, addressing, tax, election, or even census, a properly focused project has the ability to optimize each dollar spent. So you figure if you take a portion of the NG91 dollars, a portion of the broadband, a portion of the transportation, and you encompass all that in the right project, you're going to be able to optimize the dollars that are being offered to you through these funding means. So real quick, before I turn it over to Jeremy, let's take a look at some state and local efforts for better broadband to give you an idea of what others have focused on previously. So from a federal level, we have the pleasure of supporting the national broadband effort through the National Broadband Map Data Quality Assessment Project, which include a 5 billion record analysis and confidence scoring for the national broadband map. And then from a state level, in New York, we supported their Broadband for All program through GIS and mapping support and a reverse auction. In Pennsylvania, as part of the Pennsylvania Broadband Service Mapping Project to support the state's Broadband Initiative program, there was data collection, assessment, and the development of a web map application and multiple surveys performed. For the Commonwealth of Kentucky Broadband Mapping and Planning Project, data collection, analysis, and validation were performed to include some field investigation. A GIS database, mapping application, and website were developed, as well as surveys to support community outreach. For the state of California, data processing and analysis of 14 million address points and 11 telco or cable provider polygon data sets were performed to produce an aggregated 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer broadband 6-tiered speed grid across California. The project included data conversion, geocoding, statistical analysis, and cartographic services. For Louisiana's broadband service mapping project, data collection, analysis, aggregation, and validation were performed. A GIS database, mapping application, and website were developed, as well as additional surveys. This one included provider outreach, which sometimes can be a concern for some entities to perform on their own. So keep that in mind also when you're considering your projects. North Carolina's broadband service mapping. This one involved GIS data development and integration. Geocoding, consulting services were provided, as well as GIS web application design, development, and hosting. And shifting gears to a local level, so support was provided to the counties of Allegheny, Garrett, and Washington as part of the One Maryland Broadband Network. The projects involved the design and permitting of over 80 miles of aerial and buried fiber optic cable that provided broadband service in the counties. For the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission Region's Regional Broadband Connectivity Conditions Analysis Project, this one included data collection and analysis and the development of a GIS database, software, and a mapping application. I'm sorry, folks. My slide deck is not progressing. Okay, there we go. And then for Beaver County's Broadband Connectivity Project, now this is where I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy, who's going to share with you his case study regarding this project. Jeremy, would you like to take over from here, sir? I will stop sharing so you can.
Sure, thank you, Sandy. Okay, thanks, Sandy, for that overview. What we want to do now is spend maybe 20 minutes diving into a case study of a local effort for better broadband. This case study will be Beaver County, Pennsylvania, which is near and dear to my heart because this is where I'm from. So this is a very interesting project for us, and I think there's a lot of lessons learned that can come out of this that I want to walk through. Instead of walking through the bullet points on the right-hand side, we're going to speak to all this anyway. So I'm going to walk through the project as a whole. Okay, so many of us on this call are geographers. And if you go back to your geography classes, we often talk about site and situation. So site, Beaver County, Pennsylvania, you can see on the map in the bottom right-hand side. Beaver County is situated on the western border of Pennsylvania, just northwest of the city of Pittsburgh in Allegheny County. Situation is fairly difficult for broadband access in Beaver County. So Beaver County is identified as a rocky and hilly terrain. We have agricultural areas, forested areas, and urban environments. Also, the Ohio River parses right through the middle of Beaver County as well. Which can cause some division on different sides of the river. And there's various ILEC and cable competition within Beaver County, and a lot of the boundaries slice through right through the middle of Beaver County. So it makes for a complex scenario for broadband connectivity. I want to back up to how this started. If you're engaging into a broadband project, this is just one example of how this may initiate. What Beaver County did, this is pre-COVID. In 2019, the county was prepping for a comprehensive plan and getting data in order to support that plan. The first thing they reviewed was infrastructure assets, and not infrastructure related to bridges or road networks, but water and sewer, municipal, energy assets, oil and gas, et cetera, et cetera. County wanted to understand what data they had in GIS and what data was not in GIS. Which municipal water authorities have paper maps sitting in a file somewhere that can be digitized to GIS. So we created this report for them, and at the last minute, we thought, you know what? Let's analyze broadband connectivity for the county as well. So we included that in the report that we delivered right prior to COVID. The whole purpose of putting broadband in this report was whenever the FCC was considering their Broadband Data Act, we took note that the FCC would allow a challenge process. Opening up a challenge process will allow local government, county agencies to challenge the map data. And that is extremely important because if you can uncover more pockets of unserved areas, that will allow more funding to come into your area of interest. So that's what we were looking at for this. So out of this, we created, first step, a broadband connectivity dashboard. One of the go-to mapping solutions is FCC Form 477. This is collected every 6 months by the FCC. As Sandy has mentioned, that's been collected at census block boundaries. We'll get into that a little bit more, but that can cause some overstatement of coverage. Pull this together, we have a proprietary GIS processing tool that can take 477 data and run it through, and out comes your area of interest with data, I say sliced and diced. So we'll take that data, slice it up by, okay, what are the broadband speeds in your county or state? Who are the providers and what are their footprints? And also taking a look at technology. Okay, where is fiber being deployed? Where is only satellite available? You know, maybe unfortunately there's not even DSL to some locations. And then if you're from Pennsylvania, some of the local things we did, PEMA, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, recently released new aerial photography. Perfect timing. We're able to pull that into this dashboard and understand some assets regarding, especially those that are vertical in nature. Towers, existing towers, even towers that the county owns for EMS radio communications. So moving forward here, the point of this dashboard is for quick reference information. As we look at this, on the left-hand side, you can filter by download and upload speed, and on the screen lights up those areas of interest. So as you can see on the left-hand side, I have the upload and download speed logged for what the FCC considers unserved. So anything you see on the map is what the FCC will consider as unserved. Now I want to take a little bit of deeper dive here. If you look at this, you think, okay, it's not as bad as one might think. If I'm going to zoom into the southern portion of Beaver County by Raccoon Creek State Park, a more rural portion of the county. Okay, so as I zoom in here, the area in orange and red are what the FCC defines as unserved. And these would be available for funding through programs such as the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF. The thing that we picked up on immediately and have known about are these areas as well. So you see 5 locations. These are structure points that are considered served by the mapping. But as a local resident, I know for sure these are not served. In fact, they fall into the same category as the orange areas across the street. They're unserved. So technically, this area with these 5 locations should be considered a gap. But as of right now, it's not considered a gap. So as we identify these areas, these other pockets, that opens up more eligible areas for funding for implementation, which is extremely important. So Beaver County set out to find these gap areas that do not exist in the current FCC mapping. The intent is to log these areas, mainly to find out, who's connected and who isn't, get a true picture of connectivity within the county. That way they can acquire funding. When funding comes in, they'll be prepared to implement it. Very first thing we did was spread the word, spread the message. I created a connectbeavercounty.com custom website for the county that adheres to their style guidelines. Big thing here is 2 things. On the left-hand side of the screenshot, you see Connecting Beaver County. This is general, easy to understand information. If you're on this call, you probably know what broadband means. A lot of folks in the public do not understand some of the technical language. So we wanted to make this in an easy to understand phrasing. On the right-hand side, you can click to take a public survey. So I'm a GIS person. One of the intuitive things to lean towards is Esri Survey 123. So we utilize Survey 123 to question or allow the public to provide feedback to the county. That feedback resulted in, it was an overwhelming response. We got a response that was better than expected. Some of the questions we asked were, hey, do you subscribe to high-speed internet or not? If you don't, why is that? We want to learn why for future media campaigns and things of that nature. If you do subscribe, who's your internet service provider? What are you paying? What's your bill look like? What kind of speeds are you subscribing to, if you know that? Some folks don't know that, and that's okay. And then one of the biggest questions we asked is, what are your barriers to improving access? Now, a lot of the feedback we're getting is they only have access to one provider. Okay, so they're kind of stuck. It's one or nothing. Another thing is it's too expensive to upgrade. People desire to upgrade, but there's an affordability issue. One of the next things we did with our survey was we utilized a speed test application that was integrated into the survey. And this will test actual download and upload speeds, but also even more importantly, it captures the internet service provider that was used at that location. So that helps us gain some location intelligence. The third thing we did, I think was actually the most impactful. We did boots on the ground. So on the left-hand side, you see an iPad here. We developed a custom field app that integrated that same speed test mechanism into an ArcGIS field map application. The intent here was we knew we needed to visit at least 2,200 locations in Beaver County. These 2,200 locations we've identified through a GIS desktop review based on local knowledge and just experience with FCC mapping. We're able to call out a lot of potential gap areas that may be overlooked. So we developed this application to capture a couple different things. But I'll get to that in a second. In the middle here, you see a door hanger. So the messaging is key. Words are important. So whenever we're doing boots on the ground and we're speaking to residents, we have this leave behind. And in case a resident isn't there and we can't speak to them, we place this door hanger on their door, gives them information about what we're doing, why we're at their location, and most important thing, directs them back to connectbeavercounty.com to take the survey and provide back information. So before I jump into some case scenarios, we did three things when we were on site. Very first thing we did was drop that door hanger on the door and actually speak to the resident. If they're available, we wanted to hear from them directly from what they were saying. We wanted to meet them where they were. So we took their messaging back, plugged that into our application and submitted it. Next thing we did, step 2, was capture assets that are at that location. So an example of this would be you drive up to the location, drop a door hanger, and then you verify from the utility pole or the infrastructure that comes into the household or business, if it's fiber, cable, DSL, or maybe nothing. Maybe all you have is access to satellite. And we document that. So we take a photograph of it and document all that information. The third thing we did, this is a little bit unique. We needed a way to prioritize areas. Let's say, for example, the county only gets limited funding to implement 10% of their broadband projects. We needed a way to prioritize where that funding went towards. And what we came up with was, okay, let's identify those who are in most need, not only with fixed broadband, such as fiber, cable, and DSL, but also mobile wireless. Who has poor access to both? If you have poor access to both, that project may make it to the top of the list. So what we did, we speed tested AT&T mobility Verizon, wireless, and T-Mobile at every single location. So at this map here, we're looking at House 302. Here's an example of our dashboard that's a live feed from our GIS asset collection. Here we're seeing these folks only have access to satellite. Even though there's utility poles coming back from this private drive, they're stuck with satellite. Reason being, it's probably not beneficial for that internet service provider to pay to run costs back there. Typically, these residents also have to pay maybe $18,000 to get wiring run back. So anytime you see a blue dot on our application, that's where we ran mobile wireless speed testing. Let's take a look at the speed test in this. AT&T, not too bad. Download speed of 34 megabits per second and upload speed of 3.6. That actually meets the FCC definition of broadband. T-Mobile has been implementing 5G throughout some rural areas. Their download speed is phenomenal in this area. Verizon is not too bad as well. Okay, so moving on to the more agricultural part of Beaver County. We're looking at this location that's about 500 feet off the main road. Now, if you look at the photo on the bottom left-hand side, you can see one wire running into the structure, and that's electric that we're looking at. When speaking to this resident, they had no access to internet technology. In fact, their phone provider wasn't even willing to run a line there because of just connectivity issues. They were on the backlog and it was too expensive. So this is a high priority area that needs to be served. Looking at speed testing here, AT&T has a very fast footprint for mobile wireless. T-Mobile has very fast download speeds, but the upload speed is poor. And Verizon, about average download speeds. So let me pause here. Having this information allows folks who are moving into Beaver County to quickly understand what kind of connectivity, they will have at their new home or at their new business location. So we have fixed data information, but this mobile wireless information will be very important in case they're moving into an area. Now they might know which internet service provider would best suit them at their location, especially on the mobile wireless side.
And that's a great point, because a lot of folks are remote workers these days. And when they move into a community, they need to know that, their business life as well is going to be supported. It's a really good point. That's a great point.
Absolutely. I'm one of them. So I live in a fairly rural area and I'm working from home right now too. So, okay, I want to get in a couple examples of something Sandy touched on, build once. So if you're a GIS person, you probably realize whenever you're performing one project, there may be a dual application that you're maybe not even aware of until after the fact. Like, oh my gosh, this data I've created can be used on these other projects and applications. This is something we're going to see here. By doing this field effort, we've severely improved Beaver County's NG911 database, especially their address points. So what we're looking at on the screen here is 147 Cross Road. This point was inaccurately placed. It's not on the structure. Reason being, this was a parcel centroid that had been slipping through the cracks. Whenever we visited this location, we realized, okay, this is off. We need to move this to the structure. So this is something we report back to the NG911 folks in the 911 department. Here's another example. In speaking to 911, there was some ambiguity here of if the structure towards the rear of the private drive was an apartment, was it a different unit, especially because there's a swimming pool off the back door of this structure. So you can see the green location point. Again, this was an old parcel centroid that was created into an address point. Upon our visit, we realized that structure in the back truly is just a very nice large garage with a swimming pool attached to it. And that structure point belongs on the location where you see the label 247. Okay, here's another example. This is not so much rural. This is in an urban area. This location, 171, is actually in an area that is considered unserved. So from the federal standpoint, federal dollars would be available for this location. Whenever we visited this location, here's what we saw on the left-hand side. It was raised. There was no structure at all in this census block. So this is two good things come out of this. Number one, for the address system for NG911, we can denote that structure is actually raised and archive that. Also, we know the funding does not need to go to this location. Funding can go to somewhere more important. Okay, so we've visited these 2,200 locations. That ended right around Labor Day. So summer of 2021, here's the outlook. Completed our compilation. The public survey on the website ended September 30th. Right now we're compiling all those results, including the speed test information, and providing a report to the county this October. That report will include actual gap areas, not just the FCC mapping, but gap areas that have been identified through field work, through the surveys, and through interviews as well with the public. So this winter, the county fully intends to use ARPA funding. I saw a comment related to ARPA funding, very similar, intends to put out likely a reverse bid type of scenario, reverse auction, wherein internet service providers would be able to bid on these areas. They're not going to be census blocks. They're actually going to be areas defined by the county. They can bid on these areas, and the county will determine how to implement that. It's going to be best value. Best value doesn't always mean cheapest, so maybe fiber is higher priority than fixed wireless, for example. Depends on the geographic location of that area and what most makes sense to implement there. Moving forward, some other things the county is looking towards: working directly with broadband internet service providers to close these gaps. So throughout this fall, as we were performing this study, we talked with about 15 internet service providers that are within Beaver County already, and let them know what we were doing. Okay, here's what we're doing. Here's what you can expect. This sets expectations with the internet service providers. They are already inundated, and I think it's going to get even more busy for them. So if you want to engage them, now's the time. If you want to get in their books early. Next thing is leasing space on county-owned towers, understanding what that looks like. The county has 8 towers. Can all 8 of those support antennas? And if so, can they support 3 antennas, 2 antennas? What can they support? And the third thing is looking not so much at infrastructure, but adoption and affordability. So coming up with this concept of community connectivity hubs and performing connectivity workshops, kind of putting faces to an issue, understanding, hearing directly from folks during workshops on what the issues are. This is something the county will be moving towards. I want to show, let me just go to the next screen here. I want to talk about quickly the difference between a planning phase and an implementation phase. Everything you've heard about during this presentation is more in the planning phase. And I want to walk through that with you here. So if you're considering a broadband project, here's a simple 6-step process of what this plan typically looks like. This isn't the end all be all, but this has worked for us in the past. Step 1, assemble your team. Is it your organization or is it a group effort to determine who's going to lead the charge and champion broadband in your area? Step 2 and 3 is what I talked about, actually assessing the broadband access. Where are those gaps and what are the needs? You need to, it's not just a GIS review, you need to speak to people as well. which is step 3, engage stakeholders. Talk to your local internet service providers, talk to other entities within your organization, and engage them. Worst thing you can do is spend money where it shouldn't be spent. Engaging with stakeholders, make sure that does not happen. Step 4 and 5 kind of go hand in hand. Step 4, evaluate broadband options. Again, based on your location, fiber may make the most sense, or maybe it's a wireless solution. Out of that, you'll select a model for infrastructure and deployment. It's typically like a governance structure. How is your organization going to govern the use of funding? And the final rulings for funding may help depict that. So for example, ARPA funding for local reinvestment and recovery through coronavirus. The Q&A states that, hey, your goal is to get unserved and underserved people connected. But as you're running infrastructure out to those locations, if you pass by folks that could tap into that network, that's okay. So thinking smart about this, big once common concepts. If you're putting in a sewer plan, let's put conduit in to make sure that fiber can be rolled out. And then step 6 is creating that project plan. I'm not going to go into detail on the implementation phase, but you can see on the screen here the step-by-step process to go through this. And this is just one way of doing it again. With essentially step H is when you have the victory party or rollout service, spread the word and get people connected. So I'm going to pause there. Thank you so much for listening. Sandy, I'll turn it back over to you for questions and answers.
So we don't have currently any questions pending for us. Folks, if you do have any questions though after the fact, please know that you can reach out to either one of us, and we're happy to give you, whatever information we can, or point you to resources that would be valuable to you. I'd like to remind folks who are generally join our presentations or our webinars, our next monthly webinar is on October 19th. It is Intro to Sub-Addressing from Attribution to Point Placement. That will be at 11 Pacific time. So if you haven't yet registered for that, please consider registering. Of course, that presentation is going to be more, NG91 public safety driven, but sub-addressing in itself is not limited to that business need. So if you are looking for some guidance on that, I encourage that you attend. Okay, with that, that's our session for today. Again, feel free to contact Jeremy or I if you have any questions. Mr. Murray, so how do you register for the monthly webinars? Steph, do you have the link for our monthly webinar registrations that we can put into the chat?
Yep, I can link the next one, and we're still planning our 2022 webinars, so we will be sending out an email to everybody when we have those all in place.
Yeah, we do them every month, so you just pause 1 second. We'll wait for Steph to post that in the chat for you. Our webinars are free, so can I elaborate on the funding available for data from the federal government? I would love to take that offline. I haven't seen a whole lot of information on that just yet, but I will research that for you, and then I will respond back directly. Does that work, Susan? Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah, so right now it's looking like it's, services and network and other NG91 components related, but I do want to do more research on that to see whether or not, because me, I can be creative and find a link. So I want to be able to find that if we can. Okay, so the link to join our monthly webinars is there in the chat box. You just register for the ones that you want to actually attend. Registering doesn't sign you up for all monthly webinars, just the webinars that you specifically would like to attend. Okay, well, with that, everyone have a really fantastic day. I hope that your summer has been kind to you and that you've been able to find some time to spend with loved ones.